Hello, and welcome to another episode of Legacy's Allure, brought to you by MTG Training Grounds, the educational series dedicated to providing you with all the info on popular decks, strategies, insight, and more for the Legacy format. I'm your host, Zachary Cuck. Last episode, we tried out a new format where we dug really deep into the specifics of a single card. This episode was well received, and today we're going to continue that focus. Our guest is a Legacy aficionado, boasting a multitude of strong tournament finishes in the European competitive scene. His most notable finish is most certainly his win at the 2016 Legacy Grand Prix in Prague. He piloted one of Legacy's oldest and most resilient decks, Ad Nauseam Tendrils, or ANT. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming today's guest, Rodrigo Togores. Rodrigo, welcome to Legacy's Allure.
Hello to everyone, and hope you enjoy this show.
All right. So today we're gonna continue the focus on a single card spotlight. Last time we did Aether Vial, and this time I want to talk about a card that is sort of a signature piece of the Ad Nauseam deck, Cabal Therapy. So, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, it's fine.
I was gonna say, to kick things off, why don't you tell us what is Cabal Therapy? Give us mana cost, card text, everything about it.
Cabal Therapy is a black card for 1 black mana from Judgment set, and it's a sorcery that targets a player, and when you resolve the card, you name any card that is playable on this format, and when it resolves, your opponent reveals his hand or the target player, and every copy of the card named gets discarded to the graveyard. Which is important to say that you have to name a card that's on the format, because if not, it's not a card. Right.
It's also worth noting that this card has flashback, right? So.
Yeah,
go ahead. Touch on that quick.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It has flashback, sacrifice a creature, and you just recast the spell.
Right. So not only does it have flashback, which is sort of a useful mechanic just in general, but it also has a flashback that's effectively free. Now, I know in Storm, that's not, it doesn't come up very often that you're using the flashback, but in a lot of other decks that play Cabal Therapy, I think they're looking to flash it back almost every game. Like, that's a very important part of why they play it.
Yeah, so in Storm, you get to flash it back when you play Empty the Warrens. Mm-hmm. There is Ad Nauseam not, but Test, the Epic Storm deck. One of his main combos is to play Empty fast and then shred your opponent hand with Cabal Therapy. But at least in my deck, I don't do this too much, because I just side in for 3 or 4 matchup the therapies, and sometimes you get it, but sometimes not so much.
Right. All right, so we'll start off with sort of the basics about Cabal Therapy. Like you said, it is a hand disruption spell. It can target. It actually has a unique templating in that it targets a player. Unlike some spells, like I think Duress, you can only target your opponent with it. Cabal Therapy actually has the option of targeting yourself, and we'll get into that later, how that could be useful for some decks, like Storm, for instance. Having the flashback clause, it actually has not only the flashback, it has flashback and it can get multiple cards. So unlike most hand disruption, it actually can generate card advantage pretty easally, which is important for some of the decks like Grixis Delver and stuff that use it. Although I think in Storm's case, they're more using it just as like permission denial, like get rid of hand cards like Force of Will and so on to force through a combo. So anyway, let's dig in. Which decks do you most commonly see Cabal Therapy in? Obviously Storm, but there are a bunch of others, and then maybe we'll discuss like why those decks use it specifically.
Okay, also the decks that play this, that is Storm, as you explained, mm-hmm. And then I think the most played deck that plays the card is Grixis Delver. The card already combos with Gitaxian Probe to getting the free information, so you don't have to guess, you just know the cards that your opponent has in hand. And then the Gitaxian Probe also combos with Junk Pyromancer, and when you get a token, you can sacrifice the token. So you usually, with 1 therapy and a Young Pyromancer in hand, you get a free flashback, which is the main small engine what gets your opponent's hand shredded.
Mm-hmm.
The second deck that plays it quite important as a card is Dredge, that you get to sacrifice a creature, which is usually more important than the one that getting the card from your opponent's hand, which is also okay. But this makes that the bridge triggers, and also makes that you can resolve a Dredge return later, without your opponent having Force of Will or Flusterstorm or cards like this. Other great deck is Nickfit. It's more of a pet deck of most players because it's not really good. It just does a lot of cool things, big and cool things. And there you have another card that likes to be sacrificed to Cabal Therapy. That's Veteran Explorer. So you get the card and you get the lands to ramp you up to your biggest threats like Planeswalkers or Thrastuk or big Green Sun Fenny.
Right.
Then there are other decks that use it. Allure has a lot of cards that creatures that they just play to get value, but then like Charlotte's Agent, they don't need this card really much in play. So they just also sacrifice the Charles or the Baleful Strix just to get to resolve the Allure. And then it's a card that is also Therapy is a card that is used in a lot of sideboards to just an extra discard spell like Elves or some black decks or Esper decks.
Yeah, I think decks like Elves are using it very defensively. Like Elves has sort of a rough matchup against a lot of combo decks, things like Sneak and Show or Storm, and they're primarily using it to strip hand pieces out so that those combo decks can't go off. They're not really protecting their own combo near as often, like a deck like Storm or Allurin or something would. Anyway, so yeah, you hit on pretty much the most common, at least the most commonly played decks that have it. I mean, you can certainly shoehorn it into a lot of decks that run black, but I think those are the sort of the most likely decks you'll see at a major tournament that actually have Cabal Therapy. So, and you already started into some of this, so let's continue with that. Let's talk what cards combine particularly well with Cabal Therapy. And I'll start off, since you already mentioned Gitaxian Probe. I think Gitaxian Probe is incredibly broken, and a card like Cabal Therapy is part of the reason why Gitaxian Probe is so broken, because free information is always good, and Gitaxian Probe provides you that. But when you take out the guessing game that something like Cabal Therapy would normally have, you guarantee all sorts of value with it. So Probe is a great example, and you already mentioned the synergies with that and Young Pyromancer, and Young Pyromancer, is the next one, where you get all this free virtual card advantage, like the free tokens and stuff that combo so well, because when your creatures are free, then flashing back by sacrificing creatures is also relatively free. But there are other cards like Bridge from Below you mentioned, or Dredge spells that combo well. So let's dig in a little bit deeper there. Why is Cabal Therapy, as opposed to something like Thoughtseize or Duress or one of those spells, so important to pair up with cards like Bridge from Below, Dredge, and Veteran Explorer?
Also, there are a lot of cards that you prefer to have in the graveyard, in this case creatures, or in the case of Storm, cards from your hand. So, for example, in Storm, you would like to Cabal Therapy yourself to get cards because you play Infernal Tutor. That's a card you have to be Hellbent, also have no cards in hand to be able to resolve it to search any spell or card. And then that's the reason you will Cabal Therapy yourself for cards like Ponder, Abrupt Decay, or even the Tendrils, just to be able to search the Passing Flames and combo off. And then with the cards like Veteran Explorer, this is a card that you will like to have in the graveyard because they trigger something. I think one of the first combos, at least what I remember, was in Vintage, when the Cabal Therapy was printed. It was paired with Academy Rector, which is a great card. I played it in TPS, where you just got the Jarmoth Bargain and you drew your entire deck, or maybe Future Vision was other card that was played in this deck at this time. But yeah, nowadays the biggest combo of this kind is with Veteran Explorer and to trigger Bridge, or with the token makers like Pyromancer or Mentor, which it's just the ultimate token maker.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of surprising how important this card is to a deck like Dredge, because when you look at the modern version of Dredge, and I know this is a Legacy podcast, but it's it helps to make the correlation here. In modern Dredge, they're really, really reliant on creatures that enter the battlefield, and then that triggers things like Prized Amalgam or whatever. Like their creatures have to come as a card. But in Legacy, we have Cabal Therapy to help trigger Bridge from below by making creatures die, and you can actually like ramp up the whole combo a lot quicker than even the modern version does. And a card like Cabal Therapy, and to a lesser extent, even the flashback on what's it called, the reanimation spell that I can't think of right now.
Dread Return.
Yeah, Dread Return. Those are both cards with like free flashback sacrifice creature clauses that really turbocharge the Legacy version that you don't see so much in how the modern deck functions. And that's noteworthy.
Also, I think that Cabal Therapy will not be able to play modern. The card is really broken against every combo deck. They just therapy them, and they don't have Fossil Will or Brainstorm or Top or any cards to manipulate their fate. So you always get the cards, and it's a slower format. So Cabal Therapy will be really bad. Also, while you mentioned Dredge in Modern, they play great Gargadon just to be able to sacrifice things. And so and the card is really good in Dredge. So if you could do the same, but also discarding cards, it will be also Legacy.
Yeah, there you have it, Legacy. So anyway, we hit on some of the really common cards that people pair with Cabal Therapy, but there are some, I would say, less common pairings. Like I can't think of a specific archetype or a deck that does this, but I was brainstorming when I was coming up with my list. I was like, what kind of cards would work really well with Cabal Therapy that you don't currently see very often? Well, one of the examples I came up with specifically that I really liked was a card like Jace Vryn's Prodigy. Now, Jace has seen a little bit of play in Legacy, sort of in the Reanimator decks, but a looter effect is an easy way to get a card like Cabal Therapy into your graveyard if you're not just straight casting it, or if you're looking to cycle it around. And then he's also a creature that in a pinch you can actually sacrifice him to flash it back. And that's just a pairing I haven't seen yet, which maybe the power level isn't there, or maybe it's just not quite synergistic enough. But that's the kind of thing that if I imagine if we had like a really good one-mana looter, you might see that kind of combo come up more often, just because it's kind of like free cards or free filtering plus hand disruption all in a tight little package.
Yeah, so like discarding a therapy with Jace effect is like only discarding half a card, because you get the other half of the therapy later. I think the problem with Jace, where I have played it in Vintage, in Legacy, the problem is there are too many lightning bolts and swords to closures and too much removal for also what the card does.
Yeah.
Because when your opponent has like a Deathrite Shaman, which is one of the most played cards in Legacy, your Jace can only grow slowly. And you also don't get to flashback so many good cards. Like Snapcaster Mage is usually better, because there is in Vintage the problem with Snapcaster Mage. The card is great, but you when you have to play against Matt with all these sphere effects, if you have to play 3 for a Snapcaster and then 2 for a Preordain, that's a total of 5 mana, while when you just resolve in 2 turns the Jace, and then in this next turn you resolve the Preordain, plus getting a loot, that's pretty much more affordable. Avart is a bit better there, where it also survives usually more, because there is also usually, I think, no deck right now plays more than 4 main deck removal spells.
Right.
And that's also a reason Jace hasn't seen so much in Legacy, apart from Reanimator. Reanimator has played it. It's a 1 or 2 of.
Okay, so another example that I sort of brainstormed to go along the same line. So basically anything that allows you to know the contents of your opponent's hand. So like Cabal Therapy is even good when you combine it with things like Thoughtseize, because like it just tells you what's in their hand, and then Cabal Therapy doesn't miss. But I was thinking of trying to get outside the box, right, and get some more like creative ideas. And I thought, well, what about a card like Venser Shaper Savant? Now, I realize he costs a little, he's a little expensive for Legacy in general. Excuse me, but he's the kind of card that if you already had the Cabal Therapy in your graveyard, you could guarantee it would hit, right? Because anything you bounce with Venser is going to be in their hand, and then you can guarantee that the therapy gets it.
Yeah, and then you get to sacrifice the Venser because it's just a 2/2. Also, I have seen some like Esper decks playing like Venser and Vendilion Click and Lingering Souls. So they get to know your opponent's hand, and then you just, like with a Mentor, with a Pyromancer, you just get free information with the therapies. Also, sacrificing a Stoneforge Mystic that already summoned at the Battle School is quite a good combo. There to just get rid of his Jace or his Mode or whatever they have in hand when you don't want the creature.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point there too. Vendilion Click is a good one, because Vendilion Click will let you see their entire hand, and he sort of has that effect anyway, where it like strips a card away. But I can think of scenarios maybe where like you Vendilion Click and you see a hand with like a single counter spell and then 2 other cards, like of a card that you actually want to get rid of. Like say you're playing against, I don't know, something like Infect, where they've got like a Flusterstorm and 2 Invigorates. Some scenario like that. So your click could actually take the counter spell away, then sacrifice it to strip out the remaining 2 cards, since you now know the full contents of their hand, and just like it's just a devastating play at that point.
Yeah, so with anything that you get to see his hand, it's really broken. So I am one of the ones that say that Gitaxian Probe should be banned in Magic in general, in Legacy and Modern, because it gives you everything for nothing. You can have an opponent with the best poker face in the world, and they just say, okay, I have no counter. Then you just draw Gitaxian Probe. It doesn't chokes your mana. It makes absolutely nothing, only 2 lives, which is nothing. And you just, oh, okay, you had nothing in hand. In my blue-green deck, Infect, because I'm not playing black or something like that. So, okay, I just go off or make a plan that can beat your counter spells or removals. And I don't like Gitaxian Probe as a card. I play it, but Legacy and Modern will be cooler without it, I'm pretty sure.
Well, cards like Cabal Therapy are a lot more interesting when you don't already know every card in their hand.
Yeah. So, and you start the question like, I play the Brainstorm in response, or I wait. So if it doesn't call Brainstorm, I Brainstorm later too. And then it starts what will he have put on top? So Julian is a good man at not having to guess. I saw him at the Mediocre Super League, like making Cabal Therapy. The opponent responded with Brainstorm. He's like, okay, I surgical some cards from your graveyard. Then I see your hand. I shuffle your top. So my Cabal Therapy hits for sure, and you lost the 2 cards that you put on top to hide from Cabal Therapy.
Yeah, that'd be pretty awful.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we've hit pretty good on cards that pair well with Cabal Therapy and sort of like decks that use it. But now let's talk a little strategy. And now we can get more specifically into like how does Storm use it, or how do some of these decks that really want to abuse Cabal Therapy use it. So let's start off with a really common strategy that comes up a lot with hand disruption spells in general, but Cabal Therapy is even more so, I think, is the question of when should I cast it, and more importantly, when should I hold back my Cabal Therapy? When is it because it seems like with a card like Thoughtseize, you just throw it out there as soon as you got it because like you want to get in there early and get the things that matter. But with Cabal Therapy, I think you can actually be a little more prudent with your usage and get a lot more value. So when would be a good time to hold it as opposed to casting it?
Also, that's a quite difficult question because depending on what deck you play or against what deck you play,
right,
you want to hold it as much as possible, or you want to. So I think there are 3 points in the game, 3 situations when you want to cast it early against other combo decks or against combo decks in general because you want to make them not able to combo. Then there is like a value therapy that you cast mid-game, like when you get a young pyromancer on the field, so you get the full value of the tokens and the flashback. And then there are some situations where you hold the therapy as much as possible just to cast it before you cast a spell you want to resolve. For example, you are playing Storm and you're playing against a Fossil Will deck. You just wait to have 1 spare black mana before you can go off. So you therapy for Fossil Will, for example, and then you go off after they have to counter it or they have to let it resolve, and you get his Fossil Wills and see his hand. So you get 1 for 1 and the information, or 2 for 1 at least. And they also don't know if you are just casting the therapy for making your mana work perfect, or maybe you are just gonna make your opponents be shields down. So I think this is the 3 situations when you cast it.
Yeah, and I think you make a very good point there. So I'll reiterate that real quick, just for everybody who's listening. You got 3 main stages, as Rodrigo said, when you would want to cast it, and the stages doesn't mean like turns necessarily, because early and late game is really deck dependent. For a deck like Storm, the late game is turn 3 sometimes. So what he's referring to specifically is early game. This is turns 1 through 3 typically, and this is where you're trying to shut down combo decks, right? You want to cast your Cabal Therapies, you want to name Sneak Attack or Show and Tell, you want to name things like Dark Ritual or
Counterbalance.
Counterbalance, Infernal Tutor. These are things where you have to get them early in order to stop your opponents, either their aggressive win the game combo, or like in the case of Counterbalance, it's their lock up the game combo. Then you have the mid game, where you're probably casting Cabal Therapy, not necessarily to stop any strategy, but more as like value and disruption. So especially when combined with things like Young Pyromancer or Veteran Explorer, where you're trying to progress your game plan while also running interference against your opponent's game plan, but you're not specifically trying to shut down any strategy like targeted. And then you have the late game, like you mentioned, where your Cabal Therapy is meant to make your thing happen. So in the case of Storm, that's to make sure there's no counterspells in your way. Or maybe in a deck like Grixis Delver, if you're using it in the late game, it can be to take away your opponent's counterspells so that you can force through a Gurmag Angler, or you can make a Lightning Bolt resolve that will, that'll kill off some opposing creature or something like that. Like if they're playing against Infect and you want to take away their Vines of Vastwood so that they can't protect their guys, then you can bolt them down, that kind of thing. That's what I would call a late game example, where you're trying to shut off your opponent's responses so that you can win the game, basically.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk a little more strategy. What situations is it most relevant to be able to flash back Cabal Therapy? Because it's free, right? So they're effectively free, right? You don't have to have any mana available. So I can think of at least one situation where having it available in your graveyard is even more important, or is very important, because the flashback doesn't cost any mana then. And the example I'm thinking of is against decks that run like Thorn of Amethyst or Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, where you might actually want to resolve your Cabal Therapy early, or find a way to discard it and get it into your graveyard, so that once those taxation effects come down later, you can still cast spells. Like, because there's a chance that, especially with a deck like Death and Taxes, they're going to tie up a lot of your mana, and you may only have one spare, and you've got to stop something like an Umezawa's Jitte. Like, if they go get it, you want it in your graveyard so that they can't disrupt you anymore, and you can get rid of that the turn that it matters.
Also, for me, the situation when you do this is when you make an Empty the Warrens happen, and then you have seen his hand, or you guess his hand, and there are some cards that called Destroy Your Empty, like Explosives, Damnation, Pernicious Deed, or maybe they could raise you with a Batterskull or Umezawa Jitte, Golgari Charm, Toxic Deluge,
Terminus,
Thelus Persecution, all these cards that, depending on the deck, you want to sacrifice one of your 10,000 goblins just to get rid of this card, to get this turn or these 2 turns to be able to just kill your opponent with your Green Man army. So that's one of the situations that you wanted. Also, there can be any situation where you want it, depending on you're maybe playing Grixis Delver. Some players did this against me. They already have a Deathrite Shaman up and a Delver, but they see my hand and see, oh, your hand is dangerous. I'm gonna sacrifice this Delver just to discard you another card, so I can draw into more disruption or more gas. Well, I already have some pressure, not the best in the world, but a bit. But that's better than having half the pressure. It's better than having lost the game because I didn't sacrifice a Delver. And you usually don't like to sacrifice a Delver or a Tarmogoyf to do this, but sometimes you have to, and most of the times it's fine.
Yeah, I actually see that line really commonly out of the Elves players. They will sacrifice almost any creature they have available, even something as powerful as like Deathrite Shaman or Wirewood Symbiote, just to disrupt the combo player even more, because they're a deck that's so good at regaining that lost value, over time, that just not dying, like you said, not having half of an army is better than having lost the entire game.
Yeah.
So, all right, so let's dig into what a Storm player probably does often, and this is the blind call therapy, or like versus the one where you've already Gitaxian probed and you know what's in their hand. So we'll start with Storm, and then we'll maybe hit on a couple other decks that want to use this proactively. What are you naming when? What are you naming, when and why?
Also, the card I named the most is Fossil Will, but that's usually only game 1, because, for example, Miracles in game 2, they have Flusterstorm, Snapcaster Mage, Counterspell, Pyroblast, Surgical Extraction, whatever. And then you have to call different things, but it's really difficult to do this. Also, with Gitaxian Probe, it's free, everything is great, but sometimes you have to think just from the math. What's the card he's most likely to have? What's the card that he could have played before but hasn't? Then maybe you could have done something before and they just done Fossil Will it, but now now they have 2 blue mana up, so maybe you should call Counterspell in this case, or different cards. Sometimes you have to call Brainstorm at the start because they are getting ahead just because of it, or Snapcaster because they are getting the Brainstorm flashback plus pressure on you. Maybe you just want that they get out of pressure, and you call the Snapcaster Mage or the Vendilion Click. And usually, I think at least from most decks, but from the Storm deck, there were when to cast your discard and what to name. It's like the real edge that you gain as a player. Also, when I started playing Storm, I was okay, but not so good. Then I learned when to cast every discard against every matchup, And that really was an important point in my playing career, because just don't draw the discard and cast it, because they are gonna play Ponder Brainstorm and they're going to get the counters back for later. So you just have to know. So I think I could speak or write 1 hour about when to cast against every deck at discard, but usually it's like against combo decks, you have to cast 1 at the start and 1 at the end. So against combo decks with Fossil, like show and tell, you have to cast 1 at the start so they then don't go off fast, and then you have to cast 1 before you go off. Then against control decks like Blade, usually want to delay the Cabal Therapy as much as possible. Against blue without black, if they play discard, it's different, because if they play discard, they are like Grixis or Shardless. They could discard the discard from your hand. So sometimes you have to just get a business heavy hand and just cast it. And when you draw the Dark Ritual or the LED, you just already got rid of his cards. And then we come to our friend Miracles, where it's
Nobody's
much difficult to cast it. Because, for example, game 1, they only have a few counter spells, so you should go aggressively to combo off or get his counterbalance.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you have just to pray that they don't get the counterbalance this turn just from the top or from a Ponder or from a Brainstorm. And then game 2, you have already your DKs, or you wait to disrupt the counterbalance, so you can't delay this kind of Cabal Therapy dance like it will be any other control deck, because you can, if they draw the counterbalance, you can just destroy it and then just go on with your plan.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, more or less that's a basic guide of when to cast it and what to name.
So what it really sounds like is if you're at least generally aware of what deck or what type of deck your opponent is, there is no such thing as a truly blind Cabal Therapy. There's like a fully informed Gitaxian Probe version or Duress informed version, and then there's the like educated version where you're making assumptions about the state of the game and your knowledge of like what their deck typically has, and then your blind therapy is more of just an educated one, like, well, the cards that matter at this point in the game are these. So you're not really shooting in the dark and trying to get them. You're surgically picking, these are the things that can stop me, and those are what I have to get rid of. So if they have it, then that's what I name, and I got them. If they don't have it and I name that, then they weren't going to stop me anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, so this, for example, I have seen it much more than with Storm with Vintage Stretch, where you just name the card that you fear the most, because Vintage is really powerful. So if you know your opponent's deck, you see that they have, it's game 2, and they have had no Leyline or no Tormod Script, Nihil Spellbomb, or maybe you already dredge and got rid of the Ravenous Trap. And then what does your opponent would keep in his hand to say that they keep a hand against dredge, knowing that you are playing it? In Vintage, usually there are some cards that are pretty broken. So now the format has evolved somehow, but in the past, you will name Tinker a lot, just because if they don't have a disruptive plan, what's his most easy way to beat me? So maybe it's that they have just a Tinker and they want to Tinker for Blacksteel turn 2. Or sometimes you see his hand, or you see how they are doing, and you not stretch for the Fiestun, you just play the Bazaar of Baghdad. That's a land that you draw to discard 3, for everyone who doesn't know. And then you see, why are they keeping? So maybe you don't draw and discard the first turn, or maybe you do and do nothing, because they would always like to wait until you dredge a creature out, like a Narcomoeba or something like that. But then you can just, instead of the usual activating your Unkeep, you just can draw your card and then play a land and therapy if you have one in hand to name Ravenous Trap, so that you get rid of his cards. And if they don't have it, yeah, that's pretty good. You just dredge them to death.
Yeah, and because of cards like Bazaar of Baghdad, that the lines you're describing are a little more common in Vintage, but you could actually make parallels to Legacy, right? So if your opponent, say you dredge, you're playing a deck like Dredge, and you dredge the Cabal Therapy into your yard and hit an Narcomoeba, and your opponent does nothing. So you can probably assume at this point, like, they don't have a card like Surgical Extraction, or they probably would have gone after the Narcomoeba when they had the chance. So you can rule that one out. So if we're going to therapy, we're not going after Surgical Extraction. So what's next? Maybe they have 2 mana hate, right? So now you're looking for something like a Rest in Peace, because they kept the hand, like you said, they probably have some form of hate, but they had nothing on turn 1. So start thinking of the 2 mana pieces. And if they just happen to hold back a 1 mana piece and they, gotcha, well, so be it. But it's very unlikely that that's the case. That there is, like I said, there is no truly blind therapy. There's the like probe therapy, and then there's the educated therapy. So I guess in the grand scheme of this podcast or this webcast, let's look at it this way. Casting Cabal Therapy is an exercise in educated guessing and really puzzle solving, given the known contents or the possible contents of an opponent's deck.
Yeah, so I will not tell anyone like, oh, I want to play Legacy. Yeah, you get this Cabal Therapy deck. That's not a good idea. You usually have to know the deck you are facing, and not the exact deck list, but almost all the cards that hurt you, or the cards that interact with you. So you have to know that you have to discard Show and Tell or Sneak Attack, or maybe the Emrakul if they are brainstorming in response, because you can get them often when they brainstorm in response to a Cabal Therapy. They just put the Show and Tell on top, and the Emrakul still in his hand, and says, oh, no one is gonna name Emrakul, and you just get the Emrakul and the shuffle, which is quite a good combo. But I will not give a Cabal Therapy deck to anyone that doesn't know at least what most of his opponent's deck are doing. Like, I have Cabal Therapy turn 1. What do I name? They started with Underground Sea.
Lands, huh?
Yeah.
And it says specifically non-land on it, right?
Yeah, it's just non-land. But lands plays his 18 or 20 spells.
Right. Well, anyway, yeah. So what Rodrigo is alluding to here is that Cabal Therapy, unlike most, I mean, I would say all hand disruption spells are somewhat skill testing, but almost all of them come with the knowledge of your opponent's hand before you have to make a decision, right? So with Thoughtseize, which is the most common, you see their hand, and then the skill test is evaluating their hand and saying what card in this hand either accelerates their game plan the most, and I need to stop that, or what card in their hand disrupts my game plan the most, and that's what I need to go after. In the case of Cabal Therapy, you have to do that in reverse. You have to say what is the thing I'm after, either disrupting them or advancing my own game plan, and then what is the likelihood that they have cards like that, or what do I name as a result of my analysis? And you might think, well, why would you ever play Cabal Therapy over Thoughtseize? Then Thoughtseize seems so much simpler. It's so much easier to execute that and not screw up. And I would say that the reason is that Cabal Therapy has flashback, which is great in some of the scenarios we've described, but also Cabal Therapy getting multiples of cards and playing these sort of mind games, like, do you want to get multiple cards, or do you want to just get the pinpoint card? Does your opponent even want to try and fight around it? Because it's worth noting here, and I'm getting on a tirade, but the spell resolves, and then you name the card. So your opponent can't like ask you what card you're naming, and you answer, and then they respond with a brainstorm. See, with a lot of cards, you sort of name, or you choose the thing as you're casting it. You choose a target or whatever. Cabal Therapy isn't like that. It functions more like Pithing Needle does, where when it resolves and when it happens, that's when the name is chosen, and then it's too late to respond. And I'm sure you've had opponents try and respond to a therapy after you name the card, right?
Yeah, there was also time ago when I was like 10 years ago, maybe, there was something some players made that was like playing Cabal Therapy and say, Cabal Therapy on this. And then they asked if the card resolved, like, Cabal Therapy naming Fossil Will. Oh, wait, does it resolve? And the opponent says, oh, I have no Fossil Will, but I have maybe Spell Pierce. Okay, yeah, I let it resolve. Then you call the other card that you didn't name at the start. I am not pretty sure this is still legal or not. It's always depending on how you word it or how you do it. But this happened, and yeah, people trying to respond to your naming. It's like the always fight with Cabal Therapy and Pithing Needle.
Yep.
And these are two cards that. Also, I think Cabal Therapy is maybe from the 5 more skill-intensive cards from the format, from Legacy.
Definitely.
I think along with Brainstorm and Sensei Divining Top, there is one of the cards that gives you the most options.
Yeah.
Like every time you cast a Brainstorm, there are a lot of options. Every time you look with the top and when to look with the top, it's a lot of option. And with Cabal Therapy, you literally have every Legacy playable card. That's quite a lot of cards you could name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think in terms of skill assessment or skill testing, Cabal Therapy is definitely top 3. It might be the most difficult card to utilize to a maximum, maybe rivaled only by Brainstorm, as far as like getting the most out of it, using it the right time, the right way, and then maximizing the value that you get out of it. It's deceptive at first. So anyway, I've exhausted. I haven't actually played Cabal Therapy a ton myself. I'm usually the Infect guy, but you have lots of experience, so I'm going to defer to your knowledge. Is there anything I missed or any really important points to talk about with Cabal Therapy before we sign off?
I think there is only one, that if you are just casting a Cabal Therapy for the sake of casting it, maybe you need Storm, or maybe you just want to cast it before you kill your opponent, you usually name Abandon Hope.
Because it's the first card on Moto.
Yeah, but also the name is quite good. When you cast just a Cabal Therapy for the sake of casting it, because you want to get Hellbent and you already saw your opponent's hand, name this. Your opponent should abandon all hope of winning when you're doing this.
The rub-in. I love it. I like it. Well, Rodrigo, this was fun. This has been a good episode, and just like the last single card spotlight episode, I think we hit on pretty much all the high points that I can think of, and we certainly picked all of the really niche scenarios as well, and I think those are also very important. So I'd like to specifically thank you for joining us today and helping out with the episode.
Yeah, you're welcome, everyone. Hope you enjoyed.
All right, and thank you to all of our listeners and viewers. It has been my pleasure to bring you this episode of Legacy's Allure. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe and feel free to leave us feedback on our YouTube page, or you can message me directly at mtgtraininggrounds@gmail.com. Like us on Facebook at the user MTG Training Grounds, and follow us on Twitter at @MTG_TR Grounds. I'm Zachary Cuck. Thank you for joining me.